Hi everyone, Coda Collectibles here with you. It's been a minute. Hope you're doing well. Well, with the news of PSA and collectors acquiring Beckett as of, I believe, yesterday, thought I'd jump on the bandwagon and make a quick video about the state of grading in the hobby. Just share some of my thoughts and show you guys kind of what I'm doing and what I'm collecting and planning to do with my graded and ungraded slabs, and maybe we can compare notes and kind of see if everyone agrees or disagrees on kind of the way to go forward with collecting in the hobby. So anyway, as I mentioned, Beckett is now a property of collectors in PSA universe, so to speak, as well as SGC. I don't actually have a lot of Beckett slabs left in my PC. At one point, I think about 25% of my PC was actually in BGS slabs, and I crossed quite a few of those over sometime around 2022 and sold off the rest that I knew I didn't want to hold onto long term. But essentially, the Beckett slab is kind of the classic, the OG, if you want to call it that, slab for the hobby. I think PSA definitely predated it by a couple of years with their original old school slabs with the old flip, the red and white. But for the most part, this is kind of the slab and the flip that collectors think about and talk about when they talk about kind of the beginning of grading in the hobby. And this is the just the silver label authentic auto, no subgrades or anything like that. The gold label obviously and the black label are a little more sought after in terms of their collectability, and I guess if you want to call it value at this point, you could say that as well. I won't get too much into numerical grading other than Beckett still to date is the only real grader in the hobby that still has subgrades versus the other guys. The slabs are nice. I don't have anything specifically against the slabs. I've never liked the flip necessarily at the top of the Beckett slabs. To me, it always has looked pretty dated, even when it was, I guess, a newer slab in the hobby. So not my favorite. Would I continue to sub to BGS or Beckett for anything going forward now that they've been acquired by PSA? Probably not, with a few exceptions, and those exceptions being maybe some thicker cards that are autos or relic cards, that sort of thing. Otherwise, I don't really see myself submitting anything to Beckett BGS, going forward. Although I do admire, what they've been able to accomplish as a group and a company in the hobby, and a lot of their influence that has trickled down to a lot of the other grading card companies and different things like that over time. Of course, looking at this auto, Beckett also does autograph authenticating, is pretty well known for that. However, we also now have CGC. This is not an autograph CGC card. I actually have quite a few cards out at CGC right now. They're auto cards that I'm waiting to get back, but I didn't have one in time for this video. But CGC grades very similarly to Beckett, even though they no longer do the subgrades thing. I believe their head grader at CGC is a former Beckett grader and or employee. Someone correct me on that if I'm wrong. I'm blanking on his name at the top of my head. But when you send cards into CGC and you send cards into Beckett, and I've now sent more cards into CGC than I have to Beckett at this point for grading, but the experience is pretty similar. The grading feels pretty similar in terms of the things that they will or will not ding you on during the grading process, in terms of like centering, corners, edges, all that sort of typical stuff for the grading process. But I have to say, in hand, the CGC slab is it's so much nicer. And it's, even with the flip where you do the dual grade with the authentication, it still looks a lot nicer to me. Apologies again, I don't have an example of that in hand, but when you're holding the CGC slab in your hand or like examining it next to the Beckett slab, I mean, there's almost no comparison in terms of the quality. The CGC slab is just so much nicer. It feels like a much more professional product, if I can say that. There's no silly baggy on the inside looking at you, also PSA. And for the most part, the presentation of the card is just so much nicer in the CGC slab. The clarity is excellent. Whatever the material they're using is very nice. I had some tag slabs for a while as well that I moved about a year or two ago. the tag slabs and CGC slabs are pretty similar in their clarity. The tag material of their slabs definitely feels a little bit, I don't know how to say it exactly, like the composite or whatever it is a little bit heavier than the CGC slab, and their flip is obviously like lasered or etched or something onto the top, so there's not a paper insert. So it's a very nice presentation as well, but at the end of the day, I just can't see myself submitting a lot of stuff to tag, and their grading system with the whatever it is, 100 or 1,000 point scale is kind of goofy and hard to get into and understand for even someone who's been in the hobby for as long as I have. So to me, CGC feels a lot more solid of an option at this point over a Beckett or a tag. So, again, might send some cards into grading for BGS that are thick relics or autos, something where it's a card that would require that sort of a slab. But otherwise, most of my PC going forward, and I think I have about 150 CGC slabs now in my PC, somewhere in that range. But going forward, most of my cards are going in CGC slabs. Not necessarily because I'm concerned about the value, but I think it's just the best way and most economical way, assuming they don't jack their prices up, to have cards graded in a nice looking holder that protects them, that isn't a one touch, if that makes sense. So for me going forward, this is the way to go. And I've actually sold a lot of CGC slabs as well in auctions. I gotta tell you guys that they sell just fine. It doesn't have to have a PSA or an SGC or a BGS label at the top for it to sell. To be totally honest with you, you're not going to get 100% of comps on like a PSA slab of the same card, but you're going to get close enough that still makes it worth, depending on the card, submitting it, grading it, and then selling it in a CGC holder versus just selling it raw. I really haven't had any complaints about the prices I've gotten for most of the cards that I've sold in CGC slabs. So that's just my take on that. Again, that could change if they turn into PSA 2.0, like I said, and jack up their prices and their lead times and turnaround and all that sort of thing. But at the moment, I'm pretty happy with just staying with CGC for most of my grading. Speaking of which, comparing the CGC slab to the PSA slab, and this is a somewhat more modern PSA slab. It's not the new silly ones that are made out of that plastic that won't break, but it's the lighthouse slab that everybody knows. To me, the presentation is pretty similar. I think the clarity of the CG slab is still a little bit nicer than the PSA slab. And my biggest nitpick with PSA is these, I don't know what to call them, but the little plastic guides at the tops and bottoms of the slab that hold the cards in, for some reason, tend to cover up the edges of the cards for PSA slabs, whereas the CGC ones don't do that. So sometimes PSA cards can look off-center, especially in photos and listings on marketplaces, simply because the edges or tops or bottoms of the cards are slightly covered by those plastic holders. So it's kind of annoying when you're trying to find cards that are centered for your collection when they're in PSA slabs versus the CGC slabs, which just present a little bit nicer, in my opinion. But again, if you're going for value, it's a no-brainer. Put all your stuff in PSA slabs. If you're just looking to flip or sell, you're not, holding or collecting players long term, just go with PSA. There's really no question about that in the marketplace as to who sells for the highest amount. And now that they own SGC and BGS, I mean, come on, it's just a matter of time before PSA is basically so far ahead of all these other companies in terms of value that I don't know how they would be able to catch up. And with the exception of PSA making some sort of massive mistake or some sort of a lawsuit or selling to another holding group that starts to run the company down in the future, I just don't see any other way to dethrone PSA as the go-to for grading and collecting and selling. But that being said, in hand, hot take, I still kind of like the CGC slab better. I think it presents a little bit nicer. And I don't know, it's cool that the PSA slab does have some color match options, especially if your cards are red or have red in them or are, refracting of some red color in nature. But at the end of the day, I like simplicity, I like minimalism. So to me, the CGC slabs are still what I'm going to go with. Moving along, now, as we know, all three of these companies are combined, and looking at their slabs, BGS, PSA, and SGC, visually, there's a lot of things that SGC got right. I think with their slabs and their flips, there's a lot of cards, specifically vintage, that just look so much better in SGC slabs, and some modern too, as you can tell with this example. But I think, again, in terms of value going forward, I will still buy vintage cards in SGC slabs, but I really don't see any reason to continue grading with SGC, which is sad because I did grade a lot of my cards for a long time with SGC. But, now that they're owned by collectors and, just things being the way that they are, I don't foresee myself sending cards into SGC for grading again, unless there's some specific reason to. PSA for some reason won't grade it, or they're doing their goofy min size thing, or it's just a thicker card that I know will probably grade out better or look nicer in an SGC holder. Other than that, I just don't have any motivation to send anything to SGC anymore. SGC kind of just makes me sad, if I'm being honest. Kind of is what it is. I liked Pete. I liked the face he put on the company. I liked the personality and the personability that he had and kind of brought to the brand. And when he left, to me, it just became kind of a second tier, maybe even a third tier type of company that I just didn't want to spend my dollars with anymore. So speaking of which, I don't actually actively grade anything with PSA. I will obviously buy cards in PSA slabs and sell cards in PSA slabs because of the value proposition. But yeah, the only time I send anything into grading through PSA, I use a third party, submitter, kind of like gotbaseballcards.com, or I know a lot of guys on the West Coast use Burbank. So that's kind of how I do anything with PSA. I don't work with them or have a membership with them or do anything with them directly. I've just kind of found that over the years, the value proposition of having the membership wasn't that great. The grades I got from bulk submitting were always very questionable and caused me to have to crack usually a quarter to a half of the slabs from the grading orders that I got back from them and resubmit them. I've documented this multiple times on Instagram and other places. I've had PSA 6s that I cracked, resubmitted, came back as 10s. I've had PSA 7s and 8s that, came back in bulk orders that I cracked, resubmitted, came back as 10s. So, no grading company is perfect, but PSA definitely seems to, in my experience, have the largest variation in terms of, the grading and the consistency of the grading and the silliness of having to continually resubmit things to them and pay for them multiple times. I know there's an acronym that people made up for PSA as well. It has slipped my mind at the moment. Please submit again. Is that what it is? Something along those lines. But I think there's definitely some truth to that. I know a lot of people have PSA 10 fatigue, and they're saying, it's just not worth paying up for the 10 because the multiplier on the 10 is, sometimes 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x what it is a 9, or even higher depending on the card. And, in hand, does that 9 look any different than the 10? Probably not, for the most part. So, grading is subjective. It's a personal choice if you want to grade your cards or not. And in that mindset, cards look pretty nice in a one-touch. This is a Frankie 101 that I have in my PC. I have zero motivation to want to grade this card, and in fact, I don't really grade relic cards. I think it's kind of silly unless there's some reason to authenticate them. I mean, would it look good in a SGC slab? Probably. Would it look good in a CGC slab? Probably. But again, why? I'm just giving them money to tell me what I already know. It's a cool card. So, again, it's a personal choice if you want to grade your cards or not. Again, I don't grade relic cards or thicker cards for the most part. And there's a lot of stuff you can do as well to dress them up. This is just a one touch in a, what do they call these, slab mags, I believe. And, I mean, that's a nice presentation. I don't see any reason to personally send this in for grading. It's just an awesome Jerry Rice card from my PC. I don't think that grading it or putting it in a slab is going to make it any more or any less awesome. I know if I set this into, a company like PSA, they'd probably just put it in a goofy baggie that I would hate. So to me, it just makes more sense to leave the cards in my PC that I want to enjoy the way that I want to enjoy them, ungraded, and just, dress them up a little bit, make them look nice. Not necessarily giving them the tux treatment like SGC, but just putting them together in a way that I can enjoy them when I want to get them out and look at them and think about my favorite players and, experience the hobby the way that I want to experience. And that's really what it's all about at the end of the day, I think, for the most part. Yeah, there's a value proposition. Yeah, this stuff is worth money. But at the end of the day, these are also my favorite players that I enjoyed watching or still actively watch, and I love to collect them. And I love certain sets. I know, Panini obviously isn't where you would want to put your money for most people, but what a killer card. Come on. And, it's one of those things, again, that's just spend your hobby dollars where you want to spend them the way that you want to spend them. Don't get too caught up in all the silliness about, having to grade every single thing or believing in value propositions that are just going to erode over time. Because at the end of the day, if these cards went to zero value, which is possible because they're literally just pieces of cardboard, I would still want to own this because I like Frank Thomas and I think it's a cool card. Jerry Rice was phenomenal. I loved watching him as a kid. You know what I mean? I would always want to own a piece of Jerry Rice's, game used memorabilia. Trout, such a fun guy to watch in his peak. Ichiro, I mean, come on, the new GOAT, Otani, like Sandberg, one of those guys that, WGN grew up watching, on TV all the time as a kid. It's your hobby dollars. Vote how you want to vote with your hobby dollars. Don't let other people influence you too much. Make wise decisions. Don't put things on credit, for the love of God. If you cannot afford to buy it with cash, just wait. Just save up your money. There's so much debt and silliness regarding gambling in the hobby. It's completely out of control, not only in the sports card hobby, but also in, obviously, the live sports arena. And I think we're going to see some serious market corrections with that over the probably next 12 to 24 months is my expectation. But anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble on about grading. Hope you guys are doing well. Coda Collectibles out.